So welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. This webinar is focusing on, I suppose, dealing with disruption during a season. Look, the webinar won't be no more than 70 minutes. We definitely won't be going over that. And also in terms of if your I suppose, your internet connection, I suppose, gives you a bit of trouble, just log back out and come back in into the webinar and to re-engage in the webinar. So my name is William Harmon. I'm National Ladies Football Development Officer with a remit for coach education. I'm joined by my colleague, Vincent Whelan. Vincent,
hello, everybody.
Say hello.
My name is Vinny Whelan. I am also a National Development Officer, and my remit is for growth and participation.
So without further ado, we'll move it on and we'll see how we get on. So this is just one of a series of coach education webinars we're doing this winter. We are now on the, we're now in the, I suppose, how to plan for disruption during a season. So this is our final webinar before the Christmas break. So we're looking forward to that. And then we'll have 2 more webinars coming up after Christmas then. So our topic tonight is how to plan for disruption during the season. And that's our specific topic. And our outcome for tonight is that by the end of this webinar, coaches will be able to identify what barriers coaches face in relation to the delivery of an efficient and effective coaching season and explore how to negotiate those potential barriers. And as I say, guys, we won't be able to cover all angles, but we'll do our best to cover as many of those barriers that you face as a coach throughout the year. So we'd like to begin by, I suppose, in terms of dealing with disruption. And from a coaching context, we're always, as coaches, thinking about the what if. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if, even from a coaching session to a game to also to a season? And I suppose it's very important that there's a learning cycle that may assist us with that. So we need to think about what is it what may happen, could happen. So if they think about those what if scenarios. So always write down what if, what could happen, and have a plan B. So you're thinking, you're really going to plan accordingly. So you plan your season accordingly, or session, or your game, but then you have those what if scenarios in the back of your mind that you've thought of, and therefore you may have a plan B or a plan C that may come into to fruition. You deliver your program of events that you've planned out, but then if I suppose, something left of center comes whereby you didn't expect anything to happen, then you go back to your what if scenarios, and hopefully you'll be able to deal with anything that comes across your path. And then you review how you did throughout the year, and that'll help you with the learning cycle. So I always say, from a coaching context, if you think about what it is you're trying to achieve, and if you plan accordingly, then you'll be more likely to be able to adapt as a result. But if you don't think about these what if scenarios, or if you don't think about your planning or your planning in detail, then I'm unsure if you'll really be able to deal with any uncertainties or any, should I say, things that may come out of the blue during your season. So the first, I suppose, point I'm trying to make is always think about what is you want to do, plan accordingly, but also in the background, think about the what if scenarios. So in the chat function, and maybe what we might do there before we move on is, well, what kind of challenges could disrupt your season? What kind of things pop up that you say, that disrupt your planning or your sessions or whatever it may be, your games? So if you want a chat function, please share your thoughts. But Vinny, if I was to ask you, what would be a potential barrier for you that would come across, as a coach, that could be a potential disruption? What comes to your mind?
I suppose if I was to look at it from my own experiences over the last number of years, it would be planning around players possibly going abroad or going to study in another part of the country, or holidays clashing with certain competitions that we might have entered. And I suppose it was a real learning curve for me in terms of that experience and experiencing that and going through it, and trying to, as you said, plan, and then a review at the end of the year, and kind of looking at how I could maintain that positive coaching environment throughout the following season, and to mitigate. And I suppose that was a huge word that come up in the outcomes, was to mitigate against that as well. And in mitigating, I suppose another word for that is planning. So it was I suppose for me, in my own experiences, is for one reason or another being without certain players. For me, they were probably the main challenges that I would have faced.
Yeah, and we look at them shortly as well, Vinny. I see PJ says, people who may, I suppose, could be off from an injury, could be delayed, might be able to play for a while, could be off form, could be another thing that could probably be disrupt your season, and probably just being illness, maybe having maybe sick, or maybe just missing a session or two because of that. So there are just a few things that are coming through there. And I suppose there is a lot of things, and what we'll do tonight, everyone, is that we'll look at a few scenarios that may assist regarding these disruption and that we may come across throughout the season. So there's just a few here that we have. Is those ideas okay? Is, 1 second, I have it here. In terms of disruptive players, could be a potential barrier. So you have players that are probably being negative in the group. That if you lose a game, they're always chirping on about the negative aspects, or maybe doing stuff that could hamper your positive environment. Access to facilities. So you may have planned a session for next week in such and such a place, but you know what? The weather is bad prior to that. How do we deal with that? As PJ outlined, injured players. So how do you deal with a scenario whereby you have all these players available to you? Then all of a sudden, one or two players get injured. And how do we deal with that? Maybe in a very short notice as well. Players playing with other teams as well. Vinny's another one that would come across in terms of you may have players who are involved with multiple teams and may not be able to commit fully to your should I say, team for the year. Fixtures delay. So you may have players involved with county teams. Well, how do we deal with that scenario whereby you may think that they're finishing next week, but you know what? They win the game and they're out for another 4 or 5 weeks, and that delays the club season. So how do we deal with that scenario? And that's just one example. And as you outlined, Vinny, holidays. People going away on holidays, and everybody does go in holidays. So how do we deal on those scenarios? So there's just a few potential barriers that you may come across in terms of disrupting your season throughout the year. So we'll give a look at them in more detail over the coming minutes. And what we'll do is we'll look at scenarios, everyone. We'd like you to give your thoughts in the chat function as we go along, and we will also give our thoughts. We're not saying that all our answers are the right answers, because it depends on various situations that you may find yourself in your own team environment. So I think that's very important to realize that, I suppose, one solution doesn't fit all, but maybe we might give you one or two ideas in how to overcome these various challenges that you may face. So Vinny, will we look at a few scenarios?
Absolutely, yeah. One of my favorite parts of engaging with people through our webinars is the scenario. We tend to elicit so much feedback and information from people. So we'll get started with the first one. So scenario one, you have a good team in there, and there is a high possibility of achieving something as a group this year. However, you have players involved with other teams at different stages of the year that may mean they will miss some training and games. How would you approach this, William?
I suppose it's one that people come across on a regular basis. And again, guys, in the chat function, please share your thoughts on this one. What would you do this in scenario? But I think what's vitally important is that if you want to achieve something, or you feel you can achieve something, it'd be important to have everybody involved. And I suppose what we can't do is dismiss any players. And we have to understand that if players can't give 100%, then it's vitally important that, I suppose, we communicate with the other coaches that they may be involved with in other teams. So I pick up the phone to the other coaches and say, look, how can we work a scenario here where these players get the maximum potential out of playing the multiple sports that are involved in? So that's number one. I would communicate with the other coaches around how can we work together. Number two, I'd probably look at find out what their schedules are. So find out when they're actually involved with the other teams, and when are they, should I say, the high volume in the other sports. So when is it that they need to peak for the other games or the other sports and for ourselves. So looking at their schedule and communicating with the player regarding, well, where can they fit in and where can they, I suppose, be part of our team in terms of our training schedule, and to look at how can we complement both sides of the coin, as they say. And then the final thing I would say is, I would let the players know as well. Definitely, I would let the players know of the scenario that we're finding ourselves in. That, that Mary could not commit to her team 100%. We know where she is. We're working with her in terms of what we're trying to do here. We love to have her involved. So communicating that to the players, that they know where Mary is vitally important too. So I think it's vitally important that we identify, communicate with other coaches, identify how we can support the player, in terms of making sure she's not being, I suppose, burnt out really in terms of being overused in terms of training. And then I would also communicate with the players really, Vinny. I don't know what your thoughts on that. Is there anything different you do?
There's a couple of very good points coming in the chat there. So like, I mean, and it kind of reinforces what you were saying there, William. The coaches have to speak and understand their schedules. From my own perspective, and I suppose you've hit the nail on the head there a few times there, and certainly the offerings in the chat seem to have the same theme running through them as they come into us there, and it seems to be that theme and that message around communication and communicating with different parties. So you need to maybe take a step back and look at, who do I need to communicate with here? I need to communicate with the player themselves. If they're an underage player, I need to communicate with their parent, guardian, or person of importance. I need to communicate with the coaches of the other sports or other codes that they're involved with. And I need to communicate with the player themselves and help them to understand that, listen, we understand that you play something else. We understand that you have a commitment to another team, but when you are ready to come and play with us, you are very, very, very welcome. And until that time, we will work with you on that. I
think that's a big one though, Vinny, into really in terms of, is that you can't dismiss anybody. You need everyone. So what can you do to probably, I suppose, make that player feel involved and part of the setup, and not feeling that, okay, I'm letting my team down. I think everybody needs to be, I think in your planning process, I think just something to be very much aware of, really, on that one.
And looking at your team as well and saying, okay, well, if this particular player isn't available at this point in time, who slots in there? Who is that person who is going to facilitate that particular position in the team, or that particular role within the squad? So I think it's very, very important to maybe take a step back and have a look from a broader perspective.
I think, and I think as you go through the scenarios, Vinny, we probably come across a similar team in that sense. Okay, so scenario 2, Vinny.
Yeah, you have a few players involved with the county team, which will mean that they will not be with you for the majority of the first part of the season. What could you do to approach this scenario? And again, type in the chat, folks, but I'd like to get William's thoughts maybe as people are typing away in the chat. So William, just if you wouldn't mind giving us a few of your thoughts as to how you would approach that.
Yeah, the first one down here is you see it as an opportunity. So what I mean by that is, okay, you have other players involved with a county team, and they're going to be with that team over a period of time. So you see it as an opportunity to give others an opportunity to develop and give game time to. So you may not have your county players, say, for example, for the league games, the club league games. So therefore, now is an opportunity to give players in certain positions an opportunity to meaningful game time. That is, not just game time, but meaningful game time. And in the areas of the pitch that maybe you're missing those players. And that's important, because you never know down the road that maybe those county players could go back into the setup and they might get injured. So therefore, now you've already made a replacement. Or maybe those players maybe show their hand and say, you know what, I'm actually good enough to be on this team. So it works both ways. That would have happened to me, whereby you would have presumed, that this player just fill a gap. But you know what, they performed so well, you couldn't drop them for the games coming up because they did so well. So that's one thing. And I think that's important. You never know what could happen to the county player coming back. So it's vitally important that you have a ready-made placement and not assume that those players, when they come back, they'll fit into the team. You never what could happen. So I just think you need to be kind of cognizant that you're there to develop all players. If you develop all players, you'll be in a better sense in that. I suppose what I would say though, Vinny, is I try and encourage visibility from the county player though. I think it's very important. So where possible, could those players be visible at training? Could they be visible at games? And what I mean by visible is just, supporting the girls in the training in terms of just being there, watching the training, might be helping with giving out bibs. It might be on the match day, helping with doing a small bit of stats, or it might be just, encouraging girls on the sideline. So I would definitely think that visibility would be important, because people need to realize girls in county teams might be away from the team for X amount of weeks. So it's very hard for them to reintegrate back into the group as well. So I would think it'd be vitally important that visibility throughout is very important. But my main point I'm making is it's an opportunity. See it as an opportunity to give other people an opportunity to develop and give meaningful game times, because you'd be very surprised when players get a number of games, how they can develop and improve so soon. So I don't know, Vinny, what's your thoughts on that? Or is there anything coming through the chat?
Yeah. So firstly, coming through the chat, we've loads of offerings here. PJ is in. Less experienced players get a chance to shine and build confidence. I suppose you just referenced that heavily there as well, William.
Yeah, 100%. And that's it, PJ. You're right. Sometimes we assume or presume certain players are at certain levels, but you'll be surprised when they get a number of games, a number run of games, how they improve and develop. That would have happened to me this year in terms of, geez, one player got an opportunity, and by God, they were probably one of our best players by the end of it. So I just think we can't assume or presume, but I think we should always see it as an opportunity. We'll move it on, will we, Vinny? Happy enough to move it on?
Absolutely, yeah.
Good man. Let's go. Scenario 3.
Okay, so scenario 3, you have played a settled team for the majority of the league campaign, yet you have championship match coming up, but 3 of your players are not available due to injury. And scenario B, I suppose, within this scenario, is that 1 or 2 players are available after a recent injury. How to deal with this scenario?
I think we look at the first one first, Vinny, I suppose.
Yeah.
And 3, players can get injured anytime. So I think it's vitally important we always focus on the performance, about performing well. And sometimes we kind of get bogged down on who we're missing. Oh, we're missing Sheila tonight. Oh, there's no way we're going to win the game. But we can't be thinking like that. We think about the performance. Now, going back to the earlier point, if you give girls regular game time and meaningful game time, then hopefully that those girls, you won't miss those girls through injury, because you know what, your girls ready made to come in. So it highlights the importance of not being over reliant on key players too, Vinny. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes we say in games, give the ball to Margaret. If Margaret, you give the ball to Sheila. And we're always playing through certain players. If you do that, if 1 or 2 gets injured, then I don't know, can you adapt accordingly? So it's vitally important that you focus on the performance of all players, of the whole team, so that if anybody is missing, it's seamless in its transition. So you're always focusing still on, we still have to perform well. These are the things we need to do to win the game, rather than, oh, we're missing Mary and Margaret. Oh, we're definitely not going to win the game now. So that's one thing. So utilize challenge games or maybe league games to try out different scenarios whereby you may be missing 1 or 2 of your key players. So maybe in a challenge match, you might start 1 of those 2 key players to see how the players will react and how the game plan would flow. So that would be one of my, shall I say, advices. Try different scenarios, use the league games or even challenge games to try different scenarios that when these do pop up, you're able to deal with it. And on the second one there, 1 or 2 players are available from recent injury. So this is interesting because you've now played 5 or 6 games or through the league whereby players weren't available and the team are performing very, very well. Now you're in a bit of a dilemma here. Do you put in the players who are after coming from recent injury, or do you play with the team that you've been playing with all along? And I suppose what I would say here is it very much depends. It very much depends on a few factors. So you need to ask yourselves loads of questions. And the questions you need to ask is, how long have those players been out for? What can they bring to the team? Can they improve the team, or do you know what I mean? And what kind of impact could they potentially have off the bench? And sometimes we don't think about that. We don't think about, okay, they're very good players, but you know what? Maybe coming off the bench on this game would be the right decision to make. So I hope there's a few kind of ideas in that may help on those 2 scenarios. Vinny, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, I suppose you kind of hit the nail on the head there again about you might have a settled team for the league, but use the league campaign to experiment, and also use your challenge games as well. Get as many games in as possible, so you are utilizing as many scenarios as possible and use them in that, because your championship matches come back. You need to have an idea in your head as to what you want to achieve in the championship with a particular group of players. Do some of your players who are coming back after recent injury, as William just referenced, do you hold them off and maybe use them as your finishers or your impact players to come on and inject maybe a bit of life into a game, or maybe to finish it off? So really having that insight into, okay, who's coming back, what type of injury are they coming back from, and how can we use their absence, I suppose, as a positive in achieving what we want to achieve in the upcoming championship match. A couple of chats coming in there as well, William. So
I think, yeah, PJ, well done. I go through the A when he very similar to what you were saying, Vinny. He said, use it as a motivation. Others need to step up, opportunity to prove yourself in big games, communication to the team, and honesty in talking about injuries facing them. I think that's very good, PJ. And I think that you need to be very honest with your group about, okay, guys, we're facing a small bit of adversity here. However, we believe in the players we have. We feel that the players we have are good enough to still perform well. And I think that's the key to it. Focus on performing well and see what happens rather than winning the game. So focus on the performance and see what happens after that. And I like the way PJ says then in B, depending on the injury, feeling in the squad will dictate whether the starter use the impact sub. So again, it depends into PJ in terms of, I suppose, who that person is, what kind of connection they have with the players, and how they are, I suppose, valued within the team. But also it's very important to be very much aware that, just ask those questions that you're asking there. And I think that's very important because it depends on the scenario that you may face yourself. Is that okay, Vinny?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
We'll move it on. So we'll move it on swiftly. We're going nicely. Okay, scenario 4, Vinny. Let's see. And again, guys, in the chat function, share your thoughts.
Okay, so your time slots agreed with the club for the use of the pitch. The weather has taken a turn for the worst and looks like the pitch will be closed until further notice. How do you deal with this scenario?
Yeah, I think here, and this goes back to the original slide I had in terms of, the learning cycle. You as a coach always need to think of what if. I think that's the biggest thing. What if? Well, we planned for next Wednesday night, but what if the weather is bad? Or what if there's going to be, a match on the field at the same time we're training? So it's very important you always have plan B in your head. And as a coach, I should be a weather forecaster because I always look at the weather. And if I know the weather could be bad next Wednesday, then I will have a backup plan in place. So if I do have to cancel training, I will have a ready-made replacement straight away. So therefore, it'll take probably a week or two to plan that. But I always look at what if the weather is bad? What if? And I always will make sure that, I suppose, that the venue is free. But I definitely think being proactive rather than reactive would be my suggestion here, Vinny, in terms of your planning. Always expect the worst and then have a backup plan in your mind. If you think about it, you'll be able to adapt. If you don't think about it, then it'll be raining on the Wednesday morning and you'll just cancel training or whatever it may be. So it's vitally important you have a plan B. What can you do to ensure that, this session will still go ahead? Vinny, is that too simplistic in nature?
No. And I suppose it goes back to one of our points from our previous scenarios is that it's about communication and communicating with the club in terms of, okay, I've been given this slot. We live in the wettest island, I think, in the world, on the west coast of Europe, touching the Atlantic. We need to have that plan B in terms of our weather. So it's a discussion with the club executive, or a juvenile committee if it's a juvenile team that you're dealing with, and saying, okay, if we have a prolonged period of inclement weather, what is our plan B? Otherwise, our players and our participants are not going to get the amount of football that they need. They're not going to enjoy what they're doing. And we cannot send them out to try and train in atrocious conditions. So what do we need to do to mitigate against that? And it might spark something, I don't know, in a committee member's head that maybe, we need to plan for the future. Maybe we need a sports hall or an indoor astro or access to one in the local area. And it might just spur a chain reaction where clubs actually improve their own facilities as a result of your conversations with them and your own team's planning. So definitely go back to the communication piece again, speak to the club about it and let the players know that that you have planned for that eventual case.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, and this is what I do with the coach in terms of gather all the context of the key people in the area. So therefore, you might say, right, the weather's bad next Wednesday night. Now, if we're not in the field, we'll do an indoor Tabata session, or we'll do an indoor session in the Astro, or whatever it may be. So having links to all those key areas in the local community, having those phone numbers available, having those contacts available are very important. And maybe even just make an initial phone call going, look, next Wednesday night is not looking great. We're hoping to go on the pitch, but if not, is your facility available if we require it? I just think those sort of things make a huge difference in terms of your planning. So yeah, I think PJ's on the ball. Yeah, local parks, indoor possible. Again, it could be a different session you could do as well in a different environment that could be just as beneficial. Well done. Okay, we're going to move on to our fifth scenario, Vinny. And what are we looking at here?
Okay, so you've planned to conduct a 6-week block of training after the league in the run-up to the championship. The county team have done better than envisaged, and therefore the championship is delayed by 2 weeks. How do you prepare for this scenario?
Yeah, I think this has happened to myself as a coach, and I always have too. When we're sitting down as a group, a coaching group, and we're planning that 6-week block, and we know the county team are still involved, and there's a potential that they could run on, then I would have 2 training plans. You know what I mean? A plan A and a plan B. So the plan A is okay if the expected is supposed to happen in terms of they're supposed to probably be knocked out of the championship at this stage, then this is what we're going to do. But if they run on, then I have a plan B. So my what if they do win the game and they go on for another few weeks? What if? So therefore, always in having 2 coaching plans really on that one, our session plans. That's what I would do, Vinny, in terms of planning with a coaching group, in terms of having, okay, what if this scenario happens, and this is what we'll do if this scenario happens. I know that sounds very simplistic, but that's really just thinking about the what if scenario and that one in terms of longevity of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's about highlighting that to players as well, and including them in those conversations and saying, look, you know, this has happened, or this could potentially happen, and that, you know, we could have an extra block of training that needs to be facilitated before we get onto a competitive pitch. So helping the players to have that understanding and including them in the conversation, rather than maybe just a coaching team or a club having that internal and kind of saying, you know, here's what, you know, this is on the horizon. The players are kind of left there scratching their heads going, you know, where are we at? So I'd be a huge advocate of conveying that to the players, including them in those conversations. And here's our plan. Here's where we're going. This was plan A, but luckily I logged into the LGFA's webinar and I saw that I should be planning to have a plan B, and there we are.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you made, Vinny, is in, I suppose, keeping the players informed of the possibility of plan B, and that they're very much aware in their own minds that this could happen, because sometimes players, I suppose function or probably prepare for one scenario. So it's important you keep players involved in that process as well. So I really like that tip. Thank you very much. Okay. I hope we're not going too fast here. We're going to move it on to the second last scenario of the evening, and that's scenario 6. So, Vinny, we're talking about disrupted players here, are we?
Yeah. A very, very interesting topic that I suppose we're probably going to just take a few minutes to discuss this one. So, a number of players are being disrupted within the group and display negative vibes on a regular basis, in particular when the team are not playing well. How do you deal with this scenario?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what are your standards originally from the start of the season, Vinny. I suppose, what are your standards and what is your own code of behavior, and how are we going to behave to each other? How are we going to behave to the opposition? How are we going to behave in general? So I think that's important, Vinny, though. That's agreed by the players at the start of the year. That's not imposed from a coaching group. That, you know what, guys, let's sit down, there's flip charts on the wall or whatever it may be, and we agree as a group, how are we going to behave with each other? But what I would then also do in that scenario or in that kind of exercise, I would also put in the what ifs. So for example, I put in, well, we lose 4 games in a row. How are we going to behave? Our game plan is not going to the way we like it to go. Well, how are we going to behave at halftime? Or we're down 7 points in the game. You know, it's halftime. How are we going to behave? So I think what you need to do is also throw out a few scenarios to the players to probably challenge their thinking in terms of how would they behave in these challenging times. Because I can guarantee you, no coach, unless you have a very, very good team, will go through a season without losing a few games. And that is part of development. That's part of, I suppose, developing as a player. So I would definitely throw out those different scenarios. What if we have a player sent off in a game? What if, things aren't going so well? How do we behave? So that'd be my first point I make, is have agreed code of behavior and standards at the start that are agreeable by the players and from the players. Then the second one is, if a scenario like this happens, I think it's vitally important you nip it in the bud. I think it's vitally important you don't leave things fester. So obviously I wouldn't deal with it straight after the game, but as a coach, I would definitely deal with it at the next session, the coaching session. I probably would ask the player, look, we've agreed these certain behaviors. Look, your vibes at the moment are of a negative sense. Can you tell me why you're feeling like this, and what is, I suppose, igniting that? So try and find out and get the perspective of the player and get an understanding of why is that player feeling negative, and have a conversation around that. And then I would reinforce those key points that we agreed at the start of the year to the group, saying, look, this is what we're about. Don't forget what we're trying to achieve and what we all agreed. So there's just a few little tips there, Vinny, that might help, but I'm sure you've one or two more maybe.
Yeah, one of the hardest things I suppose we find as humans is holding that mirror up in front of ourselves as well. And maybe it is something that you, as maybe a lead coach, may be displaying, and you may be unaware of it. It may not be something that you would be cognizant of or aware of in your own behaviors that may be causing players to have those negative vibes either towards their teammates or towards the coaching team. Now, in saying that, it's not always ourselves. Maybe we need to look at our fellow coaching team members as well. Maybe there's one or two of them that are displaying negative behaviors. Again, completely unawares. I'm not saying that anybody would do that purposefully, but it just might be a small tweak in behaviors. I certainly think that's probably the first port of call. And again, using everything that you spoke about previously, again, capitalizing on that as well. But maybe just hold up that mirror maybe and have a look and say, does it come from ourselves, and kind of tease it out and maybe kind of find the root of that negative behavior and then address it appropriately.
I think that's a very good point, that sometimes we need to probably look at ourselves. Is there anything that we're doing as coaches that's influencing this as well? And I think that's a very good, actually, I didn't think about that, Vinny. I really didn't. I think it's an excellent point you made in terms of, maybe we need to ask ourselves, is there something we're doing as a coaching group that's just, maybe kind of, bring out this negative behavior? So it's something, yeah, we have to look in the mirror as well. I like the way PJ says here, he has a timeout area. So, the players have agreed that, if there's a bit of this negative vibes, that the players can go into a timeout area. PJ, I you said no one goes into it, so maybe it's working for you. So thank you very much for that. But as I said, you're thinking about this scenario, which is great. But they're just a few thoughts, and hopefully they're very much helpful in terms of what we're trying to do. And everything that we're saying tonight is we've tried ourselves as coaches. So stuff is very real as well. So our final scenario of the evening, you have a panel of 24 players. Your players are heading away on holidays, and this is what you mentioned earlier on, Vinny, about the holidays, and the summer months, and you'll miss 2 league games. So they're going to miss 2 league games. That actually happened to ourselves this year as well. But they're your perceived best players. So Vinny, if I was to ask you how you deal with this scenario, would you start cancelling games and waiting for the players to come back, or what would you do, Vinny?
Oh yeah, sure. If you're missing your strongest player, so you just cancel everything. No, you've a panel there of 24 players. That leaves you with 22 opportunities, I suppose, for people to develop their own skills, their own style of play, their own place within the squad and the panel, and removing 2 of the perceived best players. I always say that allows a little bit of room to grow for the rest of the group. When those players come back, they should be welcomed, of course, back into the panel. It'll be, and of course, there are so many variables here in terms of what are their personalities, what are the personalities of the group, what is the personality of the coach, and what are the in what type of circumstance are they coming back from their holidays. So again, the variables are huge in that, but I suppose in pointing it or in taking it in a certain direction, communicate with the players and let them know that, okay, it is being acknowledged that these are 2 of our perceived best players. they will be absent from the squad, but their absence provides that space for you to grow within the group, and for you to, I suppose, if you're looking at it in a strictly competitive sense, to maybe stake a claim for either a starting place or a very, very important role from within the squad.
Yeah, what I would do in this situation, Vinny, is I always at the start of the year ask players who's going away. Who's going away, or what time of the year do you think you're going away? So again, I'm just planning ahead, that I know that Sheila and Mary and Margaret are going to the Canaries for 3 weeks, whatever it may be. Then I'm aware of that, and I see in my planning that we have 2 games in that time frame. So I know, okay, now I know that they're going away. I'm going to plan accordingly for that situation. So again, I see it's an opportunity for others to get meaningful game times I outlined earlier on, but I definitely won't be calling off games. I don't see it that way, because if I'm calling off games, I'm showing no faith in the players that are there. So always give it an opportunity. You have 24 players, you're planning players, you're there to improve all players. So therefore, seize an opportunity to give those 2 or 3 players meaningful game time. Okay, so you're planning for that. So you know when advanced players are going away. So when it comes, it's not a bit of a shock. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, then you're going to plan accordingly. So then you can plan your games. You know the games leading up to that, what players are going to play, what players are not going to play, so that therefore over the league period of time, everybody's got their meaningful game time. Because you never know, as I said, when it comes to championship, you never know, those perceived best players may not be available for other reasons. So we have to think about that as well. You have to think of that as well. And that's something that I would have found in my own coaching experience, is that the players that would have gotten those opportunities are the probably ones that step up when you really require them. So I just think never dismiss anybody too early, and give them the opportunity to shine and prove and develop. So I would say is try not be over reliant on your best players, and try and spread out the load in terms of your playing opportunities for your players in particular through the league season. I don't know, did anything coming through the chat, Vinny, before we move on? Before we finish up the session?
Yeah, absolutely. Chat was flying there, but I suppose we go back to PJ, because he's offered so much this evening in such relevant offerings as well. If you know well in advance, plan around it. You might have to change the style of play based on the opponent.
And I think that's excellent now. That's very good, because if you've one style of play that's very much based around your best players or your perceived best players, then what you do when they're not there? And that's when things didn't start to unravel. So I would always say you need 2 or 3 game plans, or two or three ways of playing. And that's the point I'm making. So in those other league games or challenge matches, try and play different formats, different ways, so that if X, Y, and Z are missing, you have an opportunity to probably still perform to the best of your ability. Or if you only have 1 game plan, then you need to try that out with other players, okay, with other players in the system, so that therefore that if you are down over 1 or 2 players, then they come in a seamless fashion, and that the whole thing won't break down as well. So there's just a few things to consider that. So well done, PG, on that. But just to finish off, I think it's just to remember that, and this is just, I know this is very simplistic in nature, but really, if we think about what is it could be the potential challenges or barriers that could disrupt our season, therefore then we can plan accordingly. So for example, if I know 4 or 5 players are going away, then I'll plan accordingly. If I know that the inter-county season is going on this long, okay, and there's a break here, but there's a potential they might go longer, then I'll plan accordingly with probably 2 shall I say, season plans. If I know that, possibly, the coaching behavior, maybe players are being disrupted through the year, then again, I nip it on the bud, but we've agreed those behaviors. So they're just things you think about at the start of the year, that then you can be able to deal with them throughout the year. So if you plan about something, think about it and plan, you'll be able to deliver, and you'll be able to be very adaptable in your delivery, because you've thought about these scenarios. Now, there's always 1 or 2 that'll come out of nowhere, but through experiences, then you learn how to deal with them going forward. Then you sit down at the end of the year, and you just review it and just say, okay, geez, X, Y, and Z happened this year. Well, if that scenario happens again next year, how will I deal with it? Or how would we deal with it? I think that's very important in terms of your continuing learning cycle. Think about what you do, plan it, maybe have more than 1 plan, try it out. There's always going to things that are going to come in to challenge that. You learn from your experiences, review it, and then also be able to apply it in for the year after. But I can guarantee you every year you're going to have different challenges that may come across. So, Vinny, it's a very short webinar tonight. We just looked at a few scenarios. I'm sure there's loads more scenarios out there, but we just want to get people thinking around, I suppose, what is it we can do to overcome those just champs? I would say is, don't let it get to you. But I always believe if you think about something, you'll be able to adapt accordingly. If you don't think about it or even think about the what ifs, then I don't know where you'll be able to adapt accordingly as well. But Vinny, in the chat function, just put in, guys, what was your one standout moment or our moment from this webinar this evening, this short webinar? Vinny, if there's one thing you'd give advice for, what would it be to coaches? If there's one thing from tonight.
I suppose it's the mitigation against anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Anything that will cause disruption will cause disruption.
Is it if it's Murphy's law, Vinny, that says if whatever can go wrong will go wrong, and more than likely will go wrong at the worst time? Is that Murphy's law? That became very familiar to me there recently. But yeah, so I don't know, Vinny, would that be something you concur with?
Absolutely. So, like, I mean, take a step back from your season at the very start, analyze what all the factors that may cause disruption. You will not in any way, shape or form be able to mitigate against everything. I suppose one of the things we love about coaching is that spontaneity, the unknown part of coaching. You don't know what's going to happen from one end of the week to the next, and it's to be embraced as well. I don't think challenges like that should be seen in a negative fashion. I think that we should embrace those challenges, learn from them. As I said, I would have learned from, not having such and such a player because holidays or going off to college or a job taking someone somewhere. And again, I'm probably a better coach a little bit further down the line because I've experienced that and learning through that experience. So embrace the challenges, embrace the variables, and really take that step back at the start of the season and really have a look at covering as many bases as possible. You won't be able to cover them all, but just doing your best in that.
Yeah, and I always say as a coach, expect the unexpected. Always go to training, expect 30 players, but you know what? Expect 20 players to be there. Do you know what I mean? That's, expect to have, you go down to a training pitch, you expect to have the full pitch, but you know what? You want to have a quarter of the pitch. So I always think that those sort of things are going to happen all the time, guys. I always say, just think about, if you think about what you're doing, you'll be able to adapt on your feet. Yeah, is there anything come through the chat before we finish up, Vinny?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks everybody for your engagement this evening. Absolutely brilliant offerings. So always be thinking about the what ifs.
Yeah. Always be thinking about the what ifs. And I always say, never assume that everything's going to go well, because that's when things go absolutely left of center. But I would always say, think about the what ifs. When you're planning.
Have you had any instances, say recently, maybe where things maybe went off?
Yeah. I've had recency, all right, whereby, everything was planned accordingly in the big game, and 10 minutes into the game, we're making 3 substitutions. You know what I mean? And that's just the way it is. You know what I mean? So, but you have to have faith in the guys who are on the bench, but also it's vitally important that they're aware that they're coming into a clarity on the game plan, and they can execute the game plan, so that, throughout the year, we utilize the league and the challenge matches to really help reinforce all that, so that when those players did come in, they weren't out of their depth in their performances. So that's, I just think, Vinny, always expect the unexpected. You hope that everything will go well, but 9 times out of 10, there's always something that's going to be thrown into you. And I think as a coach, how you react is the key to it, really. So listen, everybody, we hope you enjoyed tonight. Vinny, I enjoyed tonight. It was a nice short webinar on a few, I suppose, basic topics there, but I'm sure there's other things. But please, guys, don't ever be afraid to make contact with us if you like any advice or anything regarding coaching going forward. So from myself, thank you very much. Vinny, do you want to say the final word?
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks to everybody on the chat this evening for their engagement. Thanks for PJ for his offerings as well. And I hope everybody has enjoyed this webinar.
Thank you very much.